On now to Joelie, who's recorded a relatively short presentation. And just by way of introduction, Joelie is another retired academic from Flinders University, who has published a number of books around literacy teaching. So she's going to give another spin on a project in her part of the world.
Hello, I'm Joelie Hancock. I'd like to begin by acknowledging all the groups of traditional owners of country in South Australia and pay my respects to all the elders, past, present and emerging. In 1836, 9 ships brought 600 settlers to South Australia. They came to establish a new free colony. This South Australian settlement was going to be different. No convicts or soldiers. For 18 months before the ships left, the leaders were planning this new community based on equity and self-improvement. Because they believed in the power of print and of knowledge, they brought with them a trunk full of books, which they thought could be the beginnings of a circulating library. When the settlers arrived, they saw no buildings. Ships were their only form of transport. It's no wonder that it took 18 months before a meeting was advertised for the purpose of establishing a mechanics institution in Adelaide. With the support of Governor Gawler, they found a meeting place in the first schoolhouse in Adelaide, and the teacher was the librarian. This first institute struggled, as did the colony. But some lectures were given, concerts, conversazioni, soirees, and classes were held, and books were borrowed. One problem was that there were at least 2 groups with different ideas of what they wanted from an institute. One group wanted access to newspapers and classes, as long as subscribing didn't cost too much. The other group, that included more of the colony's leaders, set up a subscription library that was actually more like a gentleman's club. The 2 groups struggled to work together. What both groups agreed on was to drop the word mechanics. At the same time, 20 other settlements around the colony were forming lending libraries, literary societies, debating societies, and mutual improvement societies. Most of those groups also struggled. It was hard to find suitable buildings, a steady flow of books and lecturers, and of course, the leisure to organise these. In 1856, the South Australian government came to the rescue, with support for all institutes and a central building. This first government-funded building for cultural purposes also housed the beginnings of a museum and an art gallery. At last, the library had a place to stay and to grow. Classes and lectures were organised. Entertainments such as soirees were popular. The Central Institute building was opened in 1861. It's still part of the State Library complex, and it's celebrating its 160th anniversary this year in 2021. The country and suburban institutes that affiliated with the South Australian Institute gained access to government subsidies, to boxes of circulating books, help in accessing books and magazines, support in finding lecturers, and a set of model rules for running their institutes. The opening of a new institute building was often celebrated with bunting in the streets, a parade of school children and lodgers, dinners, grand speeches, concerts and dances. A new institute building was the culmination of a lot of fundraising and voluntary labour. In some small settlements, an institute building meant that the community could qualify for a teacher. An institute building was seen as a cultural necessity for any town with aspirations. From 1860, institutes spread through the colony. By 1900, most of the 200 affiliated institutes had already erected a proud stone building, with architectural features of a worthy public structure. Some were even referred to as palatial. It was the institute buildings that housed many of the local councils until well into the 20th century. As local councils became stronger and richer, they supported and often took over responsibility for their institute buildings. Many of these original institute buildings are today a core part of the local town halls. An institute that affiliated with a central institute had to have a library with subscribers and a local committee that ran the library and a reading room. Classes were run in larger towns. Most institutes were the centre for social activities such as regular dances, concerts and balls, draughts, billiards, table tennis, euchre and gymnastics, fetes, bazaars and agricultural or flower shows. In the country, it was often the institute that organised the sports days. Tennis and football clubs had their meetings in the institute. It was also in local institute buildings that picture shows were first shown in the 1920s and the 30s and the 40s, some as early as in the 1890s. These social activities were a source of much needed funds to maintain the library and the institute's building. Altogether, some 350 institutes affiliated with the association. But as roads and cars improved, people travelled further for their library, for their school and their entertainment. So many country institutes became redundant. In the 1960s, the South Australian government began phasing out institute libraries in favour of free public libraries, supported by the local councils. Government funding for institute libraries stopped altogether in 1987. By then, most institute buildings were filling other functions in their communities. Most of them today are still among the finest buildings in their towns and in Adelaide suburbs. Some of my favourites, like those along the now dismantled railways and in the smaller country towns, are still there, proud and alone, for us to wonder about why they were built and what they were for. Today I'm launching a website with information about all the affiliated institutes we've had in South Australia. This website is intended as a resource and a platform for refining and adding to that information. It also provides a way of connecting with other groups around the world who are documenting the history of mechanics institutes. I'd like to thank all the people who've helped me in this project and invite you to visit and contribute to institutessa.com.